The amphitheater was massive, built to hold students from 40 different worlds. The ceiling stretched high above, embedded with lights that mimicked 1,000 different home suns. Some students needed the blue-white glare of giant stars. Others required the dim red glow of dying ones. The room accommodated them all. Instructor Vector stood at the center platform, his shadow stretching across the floor like a dark blade. He was Draxian, one of the oldest warrior species in the known galaxy. His scales were black as deep space, and his eyes held the cold knowledge of someone who had seen 3 centuries of war. When he moved, students fell silent. When he spoke, even the most arrogant cadets listened. Today's class held representatives from dozens of species. The Lumites sat in the corner, their crystalline bodies refracting light into rainbow patterns on the walls. The Venarii floated in their pressure suits, contained clouds of sentient gas that pulsed with thought. The Mech 7 units stood at attention, their cybernetic bodies perfectly still, processing information at speeds biological minds could barely imagine. And then there was Dae-Jung Kim, the only human in advanced tactical theory. He sat 3 rows back, dressed in the standard academy uniform that looked slightly wrong on his frame. Humans were new to the galactic community, barely 50 years since first contact. Most species still saw them as curiosities, primitive primates from a backwater world who had somehow stumbled into interstellar travel. Vector's voice cut through the quiet murmur of the room. Today's exercise is simple. I want you to design a trap that kills in complete silence. The words hung in the air. Several students leaned forward with interest. No energy weapons, Vector continued. No explosive devices, no audible discharge. Your trap must eliminate a target without creating any signature that sensors can detect before the kill is complete. You have 5 minutes to present your solution. The room erupted into activity. Students began working on their holographic displays, fingers and appendages flying across virtual keyboards. Some spoke in low voices to their partner species, collaborating on designs. A Draxian cadet in the front row raised his clawed hand first. Instructor, I propose bioengineered parasites, released through ventilation systems. They enter the target through respiratory channels and consume neural tissue within 30 seconds. They're organic, so most scanners classify them as harmless bacteria until too late. Vector nodded slowly. Cost estimate? Approximately 800,000 credits per deployment, sir, but reusable if we can recover and breed them from the host body. Acceptable. Next. Alumit's voice came as a chorus of tones, translated through the universal comm system. Molecular disintegration field, Instructor. We can create a boundary that breaks down matter at the atomic level, silent, invisible to most sensors, and leaves no trace of the target. Cost? 2.3 million credits for the field generator, but it's permanent infrastructure once installed. Noted. Continue. One by one, students presented their solutions. The Mech 7 unit suggested nanoswarm assassins, microscopic robots that could infiltrate through any barrier and disassemble a target from the inside out. Cost: 1.7 million credits. The Venarii proposed a consciousness transfer trap that would swap minds between the target and a brain-dead clone, effectively killing the target while leaving the body intact. Cost: 4 million credits plus the ethical concerns of maintaining brain-dead clones. Every solution was brilliant. Every solution was expensive. Every solution required technology that took years to develop and deploy. Vector listened to them all with the same expression, scales reflecting the light in patterns that gave away nothing of his thoughts. When the last presentation finished, he looked around the room. Anyone else? Silence. The students believed they had covered every possibility. Biological, technological, dimensional, even temporal solutions had been proposed. Then a hand went up in the third row. Vector's eyes fixed on Dae-Jung. The human sat calmly, one hand raised, the other holding something small. The instructor's scales rippled in what might have been surprise or contempt. "Cadet Kim, you have a solution?" "Yes, sir." "Present it." Dae-jung stood. In his hand, he held a simple wooden pencil. The yellow paint was slightly chipped. The pink eraser on the end looked worn. It was the kind of object that had existed on Earth for hundreds of years, unchanged and unremarkable. He held it up for the class to see. "A pencil, sir, if you sharpen it right." The room exploded with noise. Not laughter exactly, because many species didn't laugh the way humans did, but the equivalent. The Lumite's crystalline bodies rang with high-pitched frequencies. The Mech 7 units emitted sounds like static bursts. Even some of the Draxian cadets hissed, their version of amusement. Vector raised one clawed hand and the room fell silent again. He stared at Dae-jung for a long moment. The human didn't look embarrassed or angry. He simply stood there, pencil in hand, waiting. "You're serious," Vector said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." "Explain." Dae-jung walked down to the center platform. Every eye in the room followed him. He could feel the weight of their attention, the mixture of mockery and curiosity. He had felt it before, every day since arriving at the academy. Being the only human in a class of species that had been traveling the stars for thousands of years meant always being underestimated. He had learned to use that. "A pencil is made of wood and graphite," Dae-jung said, his voice calm and clear. "Completely organic materials. No metal components, no electronic signatures. Most sensor arrays would classify it as harmless debris if they detected it at all." He held the pencil up, rotating it slowly so everyone could see. "The human hand can generate force up to 40 kilograms per square centimeter when striking. That's a biological fact, measurable and consistent across most adult humans." He walked to one of the holographic displays and called up a simple physics equation. Pressure equals force divided by area. The smaller the area, the greater the pressure. He used his thumbnail to gesture at the pencil's tip. Someone in the class had actually sharpened it recently, leaving the point sharp and clean. If you sharpen a pencil to a fine point, approximately 2 millimeters in diameter, and apply 40 kilograms of force through that point, you generate pressure exceeding 20,000 pounds per square inch at the moment of impact. The room had gone very quiet now. The mocking sounds had stopped. Students were actually listening. 20,000 psi is enough to penetrate most organic materials, Dae-jung continued, including bone, cartilage, and the ocular cavities of approximately 70% of known species. He pulled up another display, this one showing anatomical diagrams of various species. His fingers moved across the holograms, highlighting specific areas. Evolution is efficient. Across almost every species, eyes are vulnerable points because they need to be. You can't sense light through heavy armor. That means optical sensors, ocular organs, visual receptors, whatever you call them, they're weak points. They have to be. Vector's scales had gone very still. That was a sign of intense focus in Draxians. A pencil, sharpened correctly, driven through an eye socket with proper force, will penetrate deep enough to reach the brain or primary neural cluster of most species. Death would be nearly instantaneous. The sound produced would be minimal, just the displacement of air and tissue. No energy signature, no electronic trace, nothing that would alert sensors until the target was already dead. Dae-jung lowered the pencil and looked directly at Vector. Cost of the weapon, approximately 3 cents in Earth currency. No special training required beyond basic anatomy knowledge. The weapon can be carried openly because nobody considers it a weapon. It's designed to write, not kill. That's what makes it perfect. The silence in the room was complete now. Even the Venari had stopped their constant, subtle pulsing. Every student was staring at the human holding a pencil like he had just threatened them all, which, in a way, he had. Vector studied Dae-jung for a long moment. Then his scales rippled in a pattern that experienced students recognized as respect, or possibly fear. Sometimes the two looked similar. "Would you like to demonstrate, Cadet Kim?" Dae-jung smiled slightly. "Yes, sir. If you have a ballistics gel dummy available, I can show you exactly how it works." Vector turned to the equipment storage area and gestured. A maintenance drone wheeled out a military-grade test dummy, the kind used to measure weapon impacts. It was designed to simulate Draxian physiology, dense and heavily muscled. Dae-jung walked over to it, pencil in hand. The room watched in complete silence as he positioned himself. He held the pencil properly, like someone about to write. Then his whole body moved, shoulder and arm working together, and the pencil drove forward. There was a soft sound, barely audible. The pencil sank into the dummy's optical sensor up to Dae-jung's knuckles. He stepped back and turned to face the class. 7 centimeters of penetration, more than enough to reach the brain. Total time, 0.4 seconds. Sound produced, negligible. He pulled the pencil out. The tip had broken off, still lodged deep in the gel. He held up the broken pencil. The weapon breaks after use, leaving an organic fragment that will degrade naturally. No evidence except the wound itself, which could be mistaken for many different weapons. Perfect deniability. Vector approached the dummy and examined the wound. His clawed hand traced the entry point, measuring the depth. When he looked back at Dae-jung, his expression had changed completely. "The cost?" 3 cents, sir, plus whatever it costs to sharpen the pencil. A few seconds with any blade." Vector was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to address the entire class. "Cadet Kim has just demonstrated something you all need to understand. The most effective solution is not always the most expensive or complex. Sometimes a 3-cent piece of wood is more dangerous than a 1,000,000-credit weapon system, because nobody sees it coming." He looked back at Dae-jung. "Dismissed, Cadet. Everyone except Cadet Kim, you're dismissed. Kim, remain here." The students filed out slowly, many of them glancing back at Dae-jung and the broken pencil still in his hand. The whispers had already started. By tomorrow, everyone in the academy would know about the human who brought a pencil to tactical theory class. When the room was empty except for the two of them, Vector gestured for Dae-jung to follow him to his office. Vector's office was nothing like the sterile classroom. The walls were covered with trophies from a dozen wars across 3 centuries. Weapons hung in display cases, each one representing a battle, a victory, a lesson learned in blood. Some were elegant, curved blades from species that valued artistry and death. Others were brutal, heavy things designed to crush and destroy. Each had a story. The instructor moved to a cabinet and pulled out a dark bottle. He poured a thick amber liquid into a glass that looked too small for his clawed hands. The smell hit Dae-jung immediately, sharp and acidic, like burning metal and rotting fruit mixed together. Queller root, fermented for decades. It was a Draxian drink that could kill most species within minutes. Vector didn't offer a glass to Dae-jung. That wasn't an insult. It was simply biology. The instructor sat down behind his desk, the chair creaking under his weight, and took a long drink. His scales rippled with satisfaction. "Tell me about Earth," he said finally. Dae-jung had expected many questions. This wasn't one of them. "Sir, your planet, your species. I've read the files, of course. Standard first contact documentation. Population, technological level, cultural overview. But those files don't explain what I just saw in that classroom." Vector gestured with his glass toward the door. "They don't explain why a human cadet can look at a writing instrument and see a weapon." Dae-jung stood at attention, unsure if this was still part of the exercise or something else entirely. "At ease, Cadet." Vector waved a clawed hand. "This isn't a formal evaluation. I'm simply curious." Dae-jung relaxed slightly. What would you like to know, sir? Why are humans so good at this? Vector leaned forward. Your species joined the galactic community 50 years ago. You have never fought a war against another spacefaring species. You have no experience with zero-gravity combat, no history of orbital bombardment, no tradition of interstellar conflict. And yet, every human that comes through this academy shows the same pattern. You see weapons where others see tools. You find vulnerabilities others miss. You improvise solutions that seem obvious in hindsight, but that nobody else considers. He took another drink. Why? Dae-jung thought carefully before answering. This was dangerous ground. Humans had a reputation in the galaxy, and not all of it was positive. Some species found them fascinating, others found them disturbing, a few found them terrifying, though they rarely said so publicly. May I speak freely? Sir? You may. Humans spent 10,000 years fighting the most dangerous predator our planet ever produced. Vector's eyes narrowed. Which was? Ourselves. The instructor went very still. His scales flattened against his body, a defensive posture Draxians used when processing threatening information. Dae-jung continued. Most species in the galaxy evolved with a clear enemy, correct? Something to fight, something to fear. Either they were predators hunting prey or prey avoiding predators. Their evolution focused them in one direction. That's the general pattern, yes. Vector's voice was careful now. Humans didn't have that. We were persistence hunters on the African plains, evolved to run down prey over long distances. But we were also prey for larger predators. We were in the middle of the food chain, which meant we had to be adaptable. Dae-jung paused. But the real pressure didn't come from animals. It came from other humans. He moved to one of the displays on Vector's wall and called up a map of Earth. The planet rotated slowly, showing the continents. Humans spread across the entire planet, different environments, different pressures, different resources, and everywhere we went, we competed with other humans. Not other species. Ourselves. Same intelligence, same adaptability, same capacity for planning and strategy. The map zoomed in, showing different regions. Humans in the north developed technology to survive ice and cold. Humans in the deserts learned to find water in impossible places. Humans on islands learned to navigate by stars. And then, eventually, all these different groups of humans met each other. And we fought. Vector set his glass down. Many species have internal conflicts. Not like this. Dae-jung's voice was quiet but firm. When the Draxians fought among themselves, it was for territory or mates, correct? Biological imperatives, clear, simple goals. Correct. Humans fought over ideas, over gods that might not exist, over borders on maps that were imaginary lines, over insults and pride and revenge for things that happened generations before. We fought over resources, yes, but we also fought because we believed fighting was right, or necessary, or honorable. Dae-jung pulled up more data. Historical records from Earth, translated into galactic standard. Every weapon humans ever created, we created to fight other humans. Every defense, we built to stop other humans. Every strategy, every tactic, every innovation in warfare came from fighting an enemy that was exactly as smart as we were. The display showed a timeline of human warfare: stone axes, bronze swords, iron spears, crossbows, gunpowder, artillery, aircraft, nuclear weapons. The progression was rapid, brutal, relentless. We had an arms race against ourselves for 10,000 years, Dae-jung said. Every generation, someone would invent a new weapon. Within years, someone else would invent a defense against it. Then someone would invent a counter to that defense. On and on, faster and faster, because we were fighting an enemy that learned from every mistake just as quickly as we did. Vector stood and walked to the display, studying the timeline. His clawed finger traced the progression of weapons. This is continuous. It never stopped. From stone tools to starships, we were always fighting someone, usually ourselves. And the pencil? Dae-jung smiled slightly. Humans learned early that anything can be a weapon if you need it to be. A farming tool becomes a spear. A rope becomes a garrote. A piece of glass becomes a blade. We learned to improvise because battles don't wait for you to have the right equipment. You use what's available. He gestured at the broken pencil still sitting on Vector's desk, the one from the demonstration. That's just a writing tool, but to a human who understands anatomy and physics, it's also a weapon. Because we learn to see everything through multiple lenses at once. Is this thing useful? Is it dangerous? Can it be both? Vector turned away from the display. Most species find this disturbing. I know. They wonder what humans will become once you learn proper military technology, once you have access to the same weapon systems as the rest of the galaxy. I know that too, sir. The instructor returned to his desk and poured another drink. This time he was silent for a long moment, just staring at the amber liquid. There's going to be a war, he said finally. Dae-jung felt something cold settle in his stomach. Sir? This is classified information, Cadet. What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room. Vector looked up, his ancient eyes meeting Dae-jung's. The Takreen Empire has been pushing at our borders for 5 years, small incursions, testing our defenses. We've held them off with diplomacy and strategic positioning. But our intelligence suggests they're preparing for a major offensive. The Takreen. Dae-jung knew the name. Everyone did. They were one of the oldest military powers in the galaxy, a species of mantis-like warriors who had conquered 17 other species over the past 3,000 years. They had never lost a war. They believe we've grown soft, Vector continued. They look at the Galactic Council and see a coalition of species that haven't fought a real war in centuries. They think they can break us easily, take our resources, add us to their empire. Can they? Honestly, I don't know. Vector's scales rippled with an emotion Dae-jung couldn't identify. On paper, we're stronger. More ships, more weapons, more soldiers. But the Takreen have experience we lack. They've been fighting continuously for millennia. They know war in a way most current species have forgotten. He gestured at Dae-jung. Except humans, you've never forgotten. You can't forget, because you never stopped fighting each other long enough to lose the knowledge. What do you need from me, sir? Vector reached into a drawer and pulled out a data pad. He slid it across the desk. I'm assigning you a project. Classified, eyes only. I want you to write a doctrine for me. A doctrine? Show me what humans can do with ordinary items. Not military equipment, not weapons designed for warfare. I want to know what a human soldier could accomplish with access to a hardware store, a maintenance closet, a civilian market. Show me how your species weaponizes the everyday. Dae-jung picked up the data pad. Why me specifically? Because you're the only human in this academy right now, and I need this information quickly. Vector's voice dropped lower. And because when you held up that pencil today, every student in that room suddenly saw it differently. Some were amused, some were confused, but some, Cadet Kim, some were afraid, not of the pencil, of you, of what you represented. I didn't mean to. I know. And that's what makes it more significant. You weren't trying to frighten anyone. You were simply answering the question the best way you knew how. But in doing so, you revealed something about humanity that many species would prefer not to think about. Vector stood again, moving to the window that looked out over the academy grounds. Hundreds of students were visible below, dozens of species, all training to become officers in the Galactic Defense Forces. If war comes, we'll need human tactical thinking, your ability to improvise, to see connections others miss, to turn the ordinary into the extraordinary. But there's resistance in the council. Many species fear what might happen if humans are given advanced military training. They worry about creating something they can't control. So this doctrine will either prove them right or prove them wrong. Show me what humans can do, Cadet. Show me everything, and I'll decide whether to share it with command or whether to lock it away where it can never be used. Dae-jung looked down at the data pad in his hands. It felt heavier than it should. How long do I have? 3 weeks. The Takreen are moving forces into position. Within a month, we'll know if diplomacy can hold or if war is inevitable. I'll have it done, sir. I know you will. Vector turned back from the window. Dismissed, Cadet. And Kim, one more thing. Sir, that pencil demonstration, how long had you been planning that? Dae-jung allowed himself a small smile. Since the first day of class, sir. When you introduced yourself and I noticed your eye structure. Vector's scales rippled again, that pattern that might have been respect or fear. Of course you did. Dismissed. Dae-jung saluted and left the office, datapad in hand. 3 weeks passed in a blur of research and writing. Dae-jung barely slept, spending every spare moment between classes working on the doctrine. The Academy Library became his second home, its vast database containing information on every known species, their biology, their psychology, their weaknesses. He studied anatomy charts until he could identify the vulnerable points on 40 different body types. He researched common tools and household items from a dozen different worlds. He read historical accounts of human warfare, translated into Galactic Standard, paying special attention to improvisation and asymmetric tactics. The other cadets noticed his obsession but didn't understand it. They saw him sitting alone in the cafeteria, datapad always in front of him, barely touching his food. They saw him in the training rooms after hours, testing grip strength and striking angles on practice dummies. Rumors spread as rumors always did in closed communities. The human was working on something secret. Some said it was a new weapon design. Others claimed he was writing a thesis on interspecies combat. A few suggested he was simply going crazy from the pressure of being the only human in a school full of species that had been spacefaring for thousands of years. They were all partially right. On the evening of day 20, Dae-jung sat in his small dormitory room and reviewed the completed document one final time. The datapad screen glowed softly in the darkness, casting shadows on the walls. Outside his window, 3 moons hung in an alien sky, none of them the moon he had grown up seeing from Earth. The doctrine was 50 pages long. Every page made his stomach twist with a mixture of pride and disgust. He had done exactly what Vector asked. He had shown what humans could do with ordinary items, and the result was terrifying, even to him. The next morning, he submitted the document through the secure channel Vector had provided. Then he went to his morning classes and tried to focus on the lessons, though his mind kept drifting back to the datapad, wondering what the instructor would think. He didn't have to wait long. At 1400 hours, his personal comm unit chimed with a priority message. Report to Instructor Vector's office immediately. Dae-jung felt his heart rate increase as he left the classroom and made his way across campus. The office door was open when he arrived. Vector sat behind his desk, the datapad in front of him, his scales an odd pale color that Dae-jung had never seen before. The instructor looked up as Dae-jung entered, and there was something in his ancient eyes that might have been horror or awe, or both at once. "Sit down, cadet." Dae-jung sat. The silence stretched between them. "I've read your document," Vector said finally. "Twice. And? I'm not sure whether to commend you or have you arrested for writing it." Dae-jung said nothing. What could he say? Vector turned the datapad around so Dae-jung could see the screen. It showed the table of contents, 4 main sections with subsections under each. Section 1, Everyday Items as Lethal Weapons. You list 47 common objects and how to use each one to kill. Vector's clawed fingers scrolled down. Pens through the throat. Credit chips thrown with spin to slice arteries, belts for strangulation, shoes as bludgeons or concealing blades, glass shattered to create cutting edges. All of this explained in detail, with anatomical diagrams showing optimal targeting for different species. He scrolled further. Section 2. Environmental Weaponization. How to use a planet's own resources against defenders. Gravity wells for kinetic bombardment. Atmospheric composition as chemical warfare. Civilian infrastructure as tactical obstacles. Food supplies as biological weapons through contamination or allergen exposure. The scroll continued. Section 3. Psychological Warfare. How humans can lie convincingly even to telepathic species because your brains evolved to deceive other humans. How to use cultural concepts like honor, fear, and religious belief as weapons. How art and music can serve as propaganda more effectively than factual information. Vector looked up from the screen. And Section 4. The Improvisation Principle. The core philosophy that ties everything together. Any tool can be a weapon if you're creative enough. Any weapon can be a tool if you're desperate enough. Humans don't distinguish between the two categories because everything is contextual depending on need. He set the datapad down carefully, as if it might explode. You included case studies from human history. Admiral Yi Sun-shin defeating a 330-ship invasion fleet with only 13 ships by using knowledge of tides and geography. Resistance fighters building submachine guns from plumbing supplies. Civilian populations turning entire cities into death traps for occupying forces. You asked for everything, Daijong said quietly. I gave you everything. I know. That's what concerns me. Vector stood and walked to his trophy wall, examining a curved blade from some long-ago battle. Do you understand what you've created here? A training manual. No. Vector's voice was sharp. You've created a blueprint for asymmetric warfare that could allow a technologically inferior force to defeat a superior one through pure creativity and ruthlessness. You've documented every cheap trick, every dirty tactic, every psychological exploit that humanity discovered over 10,000 years of fighting itself. He turned back to Daejong. If the wrong people get this information, then they'll understand how humans think. Isn't that what you wanted? You said the Council needs to know what we're capable of. I said I needed to know. I didn't say I wanted it distributed across the galaxy. Vector returned to his desk and sat down heavily. This document proves exactly what the fearful species believe about humans. That you're dangerous not despite your primitive origins, but because of them. That you evolved in an environment so hostile, so competitive, that you learned to weaponize everything, including your own psychology. We're not the only dangerous species. No, but you're dangerous in a different way. The Takarine are warriors. They conquer through strength and discipline. The Draxians built an empire through strategic patience. The Mech 7 units achieve superiority through technology. But humans? Vector gestured at the datapad. You win through adaptation. You take whatever you have and make it enough. You lose battles and learn from them. You face impossible odds and find the angle nobody else saw. He was quiet for a moment. That's what makes this doctrine so valuable and so dangerous. It's not about specific weapons or tactics. It's about a way of thinking, and once that way of thinking spreads, it can't be contained. Are you going to show it to command? I don't know yet. Vector picked up the datapad again, scrolling through pages. Let me ask you something, Cadet. When you were writing this, when you were cataloging all these methods of turning ordinary objects into weapons, how did it make you feel? Daejong considered lying, then decided against it. Sick, proud, scared, all at once. Why scared? Because I realized I was writing down knowledge that humans accumulate naturally, without thinking about it. We all know these things. Every human child learns that anything can hurt you if used wrong. We learn it from accidents, from games, from stories. It's just part of growing up on Earth. He looked at the data pad. But seeing it all written down, organized and explained like a textbook, I understood how it would look to other species, like we're a planet of potential killers who see weapons in everything around us. And maybe we are. Maybe that's just what we became after 10,000 years of fighting ourselves. Vector's scales shifted through several colors, processing complex emotions. Your honesty is appreciated, Cadet. What happens now? Before Vector could answer, his desk comm unit chimed with an urgent tone. Red light flashed on the panel. The instructor's expression changed instantly, centuries of military training taking over. He touched the panel, and a holographic display materialized above his desk. The face that appeared was a Galactic Command Admiral, her lumite body fracturing the light into worried patterns. All senior instructors and command staff, emergency briefing in 30 minutes. The Takreen have crossed the neutral zone. Multiple colony systems under attack. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. The display vanished. Vector stood slowly, his scales darkening to battle colors that Daijung had only seen in historical vids. It seems the decision about your doctrine has been made for us, Vector said. War is here. He grabbed the data pad and headed for the door, then paused and looked back at Daijung. Come with me. If I'm going to present this to command, you should be there to explain it. Sir, I'm just a cadet. You're a human cadet who just wrote the most comprehensive guide to improvised warfare I've ever seen. And if the Takreen are attacking, we're going to need every advantage we can get, including the way your species thinks about combat. They moved quickly through the corridors. Other instructors and senior staff were heading in the same direction, toward the command center. News was spreading fast. The younger cadets looked confused and frightened. The older ones, the ones who had studied military history, looked grim. Everyone knew about the Takreen. Everyone knew their record. 17 species conquered. 3,000 years of continuous military success. 0 defeats in major conflicts. The command center was chaos when they arrived. Holographic displays showed star maps with red indicators spreading like blood through the neutral zone. Colony after colony going dark. Defense forces scrambling to respond. Fleet movements being coordinated across dozens of sectors. Vector pushed through to the central briefing area where the admirals were gathering. Daijung followed, feeling completely out of place among the highest-ranking officers in the Galactic Defense Forces. Admiral Chen, a high-ranking military official, was coordinating the response. His cybernetic enhancements glowed with activity as he processed information from 100 sources simultaneously. He looked up as Vector approached. Instructor, this is a command staff meeting. Cadets are not... This cadet just wrote something you need to see. Vector held up the data pad. Intelligence on human tactical doctrine. If we're going to fight the Takreen, we need to understand how the newest species in our alliance thinks about warfare. Admiral Chen's optical sensors focused on Daijung, scanning him with technology that probably knew his heart rate and stress levels instantly. You're the human who demonstrated the pencil technique. I heard about that. Yes, sir. What's in the document? Vector answered. Everything humans know about improvised warfare, asymmetric tactics, and weaponizing ordinary materials. Written by someone who grew up in that culture and understands it instinctively. The Admiral was silent for 3 seconds, which was an eternity for a Mech 7 unit's processing speed. Then he extended a hand. Upload it to the tactical database. We'll review it during the briefing. The briefing room fell silent as the tactical displays updated with information from the front lines. The Takreen assault was devastating in its efficiency. 3 mining colonies had gone dark within the first hour. 2 defensive platforms were destroyed before they could even raise shields. The enemy knew exactly where to strike and how to maximize damage. Admiral Chen stood at the center of the room, his mechanical body perfectly still while his processors analyzed the incoming data. Around him, military leaders from a dozen species watched the displays with growing concern. The Takreen weren't just attacking, they were dissecting the defensive network with surgical precision. "They've been planning this for years," said Admiral Taiwan, a Draxian fleet commander whose scales bore scars from conflicts most species had only read about. "Every strike is hitting a weak point we didn't know we had. Their intelligence is perfect. Our conventional response isn't working," added Commander Ji-Hai, a Lumite tactical officer whose crystalline body pulsed with agitated patterns. "They anticipated our fleet movements. Every time we reinforce a position, they've already moved to exploit the gap we created." Vector raised a clawed hand. "Then perhaps we need an unconventional response." Admiral Chen's optical sensors focused on him. "Explain." "Cadet Kim has written a tactical doctrine based on human approaches to warfare, methods that the Takreen won't anticipate because they're based on improvisation rather than established military theory." "A cadet's academic work?" Admiral Taiwan's scales rippled with skepticism. "We're facing an empire that hasn't lost a war in 3 millennia, and you want us to rely on a student's homework?" "Not homework. Combat philosophy from a species that spent 10,000 years fighting wars against itself." Vector transferred the document to the main display. "With respect, Admiral, the Takreen are winning because they understand conventional warfare better than we do. They've studied our tactics for years and planned countermeasures for everything. But they haven't studied human warfare, because humans are too new to the galactic stage." Admiral Chen processed the document at electronic speed. 5 seconds later, his optical sensors brightened. "This is comprehensive, detailed analysis of improvised weaponry, environmental exploitation, psychological warfare tactics. Where did you get this information, Cadet?" Daejung stepped forward, trying not to show how intimidated he felt by the room full of officers whose combined military experience measured in centuries. "I wrote it, sir. Instructor Vector asked me to document human tactical thinking." "Human tactical thinking?" Admiral Taiwan moved closer, studying Daejung with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. "You're telling me your species has developed tactical innovations that trained military strategists haven't considered?" "Not innovations, sir. Adaptations. Humans learned to fight with whatever was available because we spent most of our history without access to manufactured weapons. We used tools, environment, psychology, anything that gave an advantage." Commander Ji-Hai's crystalline body chimed softly as she examined the document. "This section on psychological warfare. You claim humans can deceive telepathic species?" "Yes, Commander. Human brains evolved sophisticated deception capabilities because we competed against other humans who were equally intelligent. We learned to lie convincingly even to people who knew us intimately. Some studies suggest this translates to resistance against telepathic scanning, though the mechanism isn't fully understood." "And this?" Admiral Chen highlighted another section. "Environmental weaponization, using a planet's own resources as weapons against defenders. Explain this concept." Daejung pulled up a tactical display showing a generic colony layout. "Most defensive strategies focus on protecting assets, buildings, infrastructure, population centers, but those same assets can become weapons if you understand the environment. Atmosphere composition can be ignited or poisoned. Water supplies can be contaminated or weaponized through pressure. Gravity wells can be used for kinetic strikes. The defender's home becomes their vulnerability." The room was quiet as the implications sank in. "You're describing total warfare," Admiral Taiwan said slowly. "Tactics that don't distinguish between military and civilian targets." "I'm describing asymmetric warfare," Daejung corrected carefully. "Methods used by forces that are outmatched in conventional combat. Yes, they're brutal, but they're also effective against enemies who rely on technological superiority and established doctrine." Admiral Chen turned back to the tactical displays showing the Takreen advance. The mining colonies they've taken, 3 of them are in the Helios sector. Station Tau 7 was the primary command center for that region. Heavily fortified, Commander Jihai noted. Automated defenses, shielded command bunker, full garrison of troops. The Takreen took it in under 2 hours. Which means they're confident in holding it. Vecthor's scales shifted to a calculating pattern. A captured command center would give them control over the entire sector's defensive network. Admiral Chen processed for a moment. What are you suggesting? A small team. Insertion through unconventional means. Objective. Neutralize the Takreen command structure using improvised methods that won't trigger their sensor networks or tactical expectations. Suicide mission, Admiral Tae-Wan said flatly. They'll have that station locked down. No way to insert a team without being detected. Not if the team uses the methods in this doctrine. Vector gestured at Daijung's document. The Takreen will be watching for military assault. Power armor, plasma weapons, electronic warfare. They won't be watching for maintenance workers with toolkits. The room erupted in arguments. Officers shouting over each other, some supporting the idea, others calling it insane. Admiral Chen raised one mechanical hand and silence fell instantly. Instructor Vector, you're proposing we send a team armed with improvised weapons against one of the most successful military forces in galactic history. Yes, sir. Based on tactical concepts from a species that's been in space for 50 years. Yes, sir. And you believe this approach could succeed where conventional assault would fail? I believe the Takreen won't expect it. And in warfare, surprise is its own weapon. Admiral Chen was silent for 10 full seconds, an eternity for his processing speed. Then he turned to Daejung. Cadet Kim, could you plan and execute such an operation? Daejung felt his mouth go dry. Sir, I'm a first-year tactical student. I don't have the experience. That wasn't the question. Could you do it? He thought about the doctrine he'd written, about every lesson humanity had learned through millennia of warfare, about the pencil demonstration and Vector's reaction, about what it meant to be human in a galaxy of species that had forgotten how to fight dirty. Yes, sir, but I'd need a team that understands the approach. Other humans would be ideal. There are 3 other human cadets at this academy, Admiral Chen said. Jiwoo Park, Hana Lee, and Sungmin Choi, all first-year tactical students. You've worked with them? Yes, sir. We study together sometimes. Could they execute operations based on your doctrine? Daejung thought about his fellow cadets. Jiwoo was brilliant with chemistry and biology. Hana had an engineering background and understood mechanical systems intuitively. Sungmin was a former competitive athlete with exceptional spatial awareness and physical capability. They could, sir. They'd understand the principles immediately because they grew up with them. We all did. Admiral Tae-Wan's scales had gone dark with concern. You're seriously considering sending 4 first-year cadets on a Black Ops mission into enemy-occupied territory? I'm considering using assets the enemy won't anticipate. Admiral Chen brought up personnel files for the 4 humans. 4 cadets who think differently than any tactical training the Takreen have encountered. 4 individuals who can look at a hardware store and see an armory. He turned to Vector. This is your recommendation. What's your assessment of mission viability? Vector was silent for a moment. His scales shifted through several patterns before settling on one that Daejung recognized as grim determination. Conventional assault on Station Tau 7 would require a fleet battle we can't win right now. The Takreen have superior positioning and firepower. We'd lose ships and accomplish nothing. This approach has a low probability of success, but it's not 0. And 0 is what we have right now. Low probability. Admiral Tae-Wan shook his head. You're sending children to die. I'm sending soldiers to fight, Vector corrected. They enrolled in a military academy. They took oaths, and right now they might be our best option. Admiral Chen processed for another moment. Then he made his decision. Authorization granted. Assemble your team, Cadet Kim. You have 12 hours to plan and prepare. Mission parameters: infiltrate Station Tau 7, neutralize Takreen command structure, extract if possible. Rules of engagement: whatever works. Whatever works, sir. Your doctrine talks about improvisation and adaptation. I'm giving you freedom to operate outside standard protocols. Use whatever methods you deem effective. Just succeed. Daejung saluted, his hand shaking slightly. Understood, sir. Dismissed. Instructor Vector will provide mission support and resources. Admiral Chen turned back to the tactical displays. The rest of you, we have a war to coordinate. If this team succeeds, it might buy us time to mount a proper defense. If they fail, we'll need to fall back to secondary positions and prepare for a longer conflict. Daejung followed Vector out of the command center, his mind racing. 12 hours to plan an operation that could change the course of a war. 4 cadets against an enemy that had never been defeated. They were going to need more than pencils. Sir, Daejung said as they walked, where do we even start? Vector's scales shifted to something that might have been grim amusement. You wrote the doctrine, Cadet. Tell me, what's the first rule of improvised warfare? Daejung thought back to his document, to the principles he'd outlined. Assess available resources. Understand the environment. Identify enemy weaknesses. Then adapt your approach to maximize advantages while minimizing risks. Correct. So let's start there. We have 12 hours. Use them well. They headed toward the equipment facility where Vector had already arranged for a private workspace. On the way, they passed other cadets heading to emergency assembly points. Everyone knew something big was happening, but most didn't know the details yet. Ji-woo, Hana, and Sung-min were already waiting at the facility entrance when they arrived. Someone had apparently sent them a priority summons. The 3 humans looked confused, but alert. What's going on? Ji-woo asked. She was shorter than the others, with quick movements and eyes that noticed everything. Daejung looked at his fellow humans, the only other members of their species at the academy. We just got volunteered for a suicide mission. Who wants to help me plan it? Hana, tall and athletic with a calm demeanor that hid intense focus, raised an eyebrow. Does it involve the pencil thing? Among other things, yes. Sung-min grinned. He had the relaxed confidence of someone who'd spent years competing at high levels. Finally. I was wondering when they'd let us do something interesting. Vector opened the facility door. Inside, all of you. We have work to do and not much time to do it. The 4 humans followed him into what looked like a combination workshop and tactical planning center. Tables covered with tools, supplies, maps, and equipment. Everything they might need to plan an operation that conventional military wisdom would call impossible. Station Tau 7. Vector pulled up a holographic schematic. Currently occupied by Takreen forces. Your target. The holographic schematic of Station Tau 7 rotated slowly in the center of the room. The mining station was massive, designed to process ore from the asteroid belt that surrounded it. Multiple levels, hundreds of corridors, enough space to house 3,000 workers during normal operations. Now it held Takreen warriors and whatever command structure they'd established. Daejung studied the layout while his 3 fellow humans gathered around. Vector stood back, watching them work, his ancient eyes tracking their interactions with interest. Talk me through what you see, Daejung said to the others. Hana leaned closer to the schematic, her engineering background immediately apparent in how she analyzed the structure. It's old, built 60 years ago using standard colonial design. That means infrastructure will be standardized, easy to predict. Power conduits follow the same routing pattern used in hundreds of stations. Ventilation systems? Ji-Woo asked. Standard atmospheric processors, designed for human-compatible breathing mix, but adjustable for different species requirements. Hana manipulated the hologram, highlighting the ventilation network in blue. The Takarine breathe higher oxygen concentrations than humans. They'll have adjusted the atmospheric mix, which means they're vulnerable to changes in air composition, Ji-Woo said immediately. Her background in chemistry made the connection obvious. If we can access the atmospheric controls... Sung-min was looking at something else entirely. These waste disposal chutes. They run through every level. Nothing fancy, just gravitational drop systems. The Takarine wouldn't consider them a security risk. Because they're disgusting, Ji-Woo said with a slight smile. Crawling through sewage to infiltrate an enemy position. Very human. Vector's scales rippled. You're serious about that approach? Sir, the Takarine are warriors, Dae-jung said. Their culture values honor and direct combat. They'll fortify obvious entry points, monitor sensor arrays, watch for ships approaching. But maintenance access and waste systems, those are beneath a warrior's concern. Literally, Sung-min added. So we enter through the sewage system, Dae-jung said, thinking out loud. Gives us access to the lower levels. From there, we work our way up to the command center. Questions our equipment and tactics once we're inside. Hana pulled up the supply list that Vector had provided. It was extensive, but notably lacking in military hardware. They're giving us maintenance tools, cleaning supplies, basic chemistry sets, and personal items. Nothing that reads as weapons on a sensor scan. Perfect, Ji-Woo said. She was already sorting through the chemical supplies. I can work with this. Cleaning solutions, industrial solvents, compressed gases. Give me 2 hours, and I'll have improvised weapons that the Takarine won't see coming. Like what? Vector asked. Ji-Woo held up 2 bottles from the supply list. Standard degreaser and drain cleaner. Separately, they're harmless. Mixed together in a pressurized container, they create an exothermic reaction that produces toxic fumes and can be used as a chemical spray weapon. Add a spark, and it becomes an improvised flamethrower. She pulled up chemical formulas on a display. The Takarine communicate through pheromones, right? Their whole coordination system relies on chemical signals. If I can create the right compounds, I can disrupt their communication or even trigger false signals, make them think there's a fire when there isn't, or that allies are enemies. Vector's scales had gone pale again. You learned this at the academy? No, sir. I learned basic chemistry at university on Earth. The weaponization part I'm figuring out now. She looked at the other humans. We all do this, don't we? Look at something and immediately think about how it could be dangerous? Sung-min nodded. It's pattern recognition. Every human child learns that the world is full of things that can hurt you. Hot stoves, sharp corners, poisonous plants. We're trained from birth to identify hazards, and then weaponize them. Vector said quietly. When necessary, Dae-jung confirmed. What about physical approaches? Once we're inside, we'll need close combat options that don't trigger weapon scanners. Hana was already pulling items from the supply inventory. Maintenance tools are perfect. Wrenches, pry bars, sharpened screwdrivers, all legitimate equipment for station workers, but in the right hands, they're devastating. She picked up a length of cable. Piano wire for cutting through obstacles, also works as a garrote. Duct tape for repairs, also works as restraints. Glass cleaner bottles can be pressurized containers. Everything has multiple uses. The Takarine are larger than humans, Vector noted. Stronger, heavier carapace armor. How do you compensate for physical disadvantage? We don't fight fair, Sung-min said simply. He was examining the station's schematic again, marking specific locations. Human combat doctrine for dealing with stronger opponents is pretty consistent. Avoid direct confrontation, target weak points, use environment to your advantage, strike from unexpected angles. He highlighted areas on the map. Narrow corridors where their size is a disadvantage. Vertical spaces where we can attack from above. Blind corners where we can set traps. We turn their home ground into a maze that favors smaller, faster opponents. Dai Jung was impressed by how quickly his fellow humans were adapting to the mission parameters. They weren't asking if it was possible. They were figuring out how to make it work. That was the human approach, he realized. Not accepting limitations, but finding ways around them. Timeline, he said. We have 12 hours to prepare. Let's break it down. Jiwoo, you have 4 hours to prepare chemical weapons and tools. Hana, same time frame for mechanical preparations and equipment modification. Sungmin and I will plan the infiltration route and identify target locations. What about extraction? Vector asked. The 4 humans looked at each other. After a moment, Hana spoke. Sir, with respect, we're not planning for extraction. We're planning to succeed. If we're still alive after completing the mission, we'll improvise an exit. But spending time on extraction planning takes focus away from mission success. That's incredibly dangerous thinking. It's realistic thinking, Daejung said. We're 4 cadets infiltrating a hardened military position, held by an enemy that's never lost. If we survive, it'll be because we completed the objective, and the Takreen were too disrupted to stop us from leaving. Detailed extraction plans are meaningless if we fail the primary mission. Vector was silent for a long moment. His scales went through several color shifts before settling on something that looked like resigned acceptance. Very well. I'll coordinate support from here. Communications will be limited once you're inside to avoid detection. You'll be largely on your own. Understood, sir. The next 4 hours passed in focused preparation. Jiwoo worked at a chemistry station, carefully mixing compounds and testing reactions. She created several devices that looked like nothing more than cleaning supplies, but could produce effects ranging from blinding chemical smoke to flesh-burning acid sprays. Hana modified maintenance tools, sharpening edges, weighting grips, testing leverage points. She turned a simple pry bar into a devastating close-quarters weapon. She rigged pressure sensors from repair equipment to create improvised alarms and traps. Sungmin and Daejung studied the station layout until they could navigate it blind. They identified choke points, ambush locations, fallback positions. They memorized the atmospheric system controls, the power grid access points, the communication nodes. They planned for the Takareen response patterns based on available intelligence about the species, warriors who valued direct combat, communication through pheromones, strong sense of hierarchy and discipline. All of that created predictable behaviors that could be exploited. At hour 8, they assembled to review the complete plan. Entry through waste disposal, Daejung began, pointing at the schematic. 4 hours of crawling through sewage to reach the lower maintenance levels, unpleasant but undetected. Once inside, we split into 2 teams, Sungmin continued. Hana and I take the atmospheric controls. Jiwoo and Daejung move toward the command center. I'll introduce modified compounds into the ventilation system, Jiwoo explained. Not enough to kill, but enough to disrupt their pheromone communication. They'll start getting confused signals, false information. Their coordination will break down. While they're dealing with that, Sungmin and I sabotage the power grid, Hana said. Targeted blackouts in specific sections, create chaos and limit their ability to respond cohesively. And then we converge on the command center, Daejung finished. The Takareen commanders will be trying to restore order. They won't expect a physical assault during the confusion. We use improvised weapons to neutralize the command structure. Without leadership and with compromised communications, the Takreen garrison will be unable to coordinate a defense. Vector studied the plan from every angle. It's insane, he said finally. But will it work? Daejung asked. The instructor's scales rippled with what might have been grim amusement. Honestly, I have no idea. No one's ever tried anything like this against the Takreen. They're used to conventional military operations, fleets and armies and established doctrine. This is the opposite of everything they expect. That's why it might succeed, Jiwoo said. They'll be looking for the threat they understand, not for humans with cleaning supplies and maintenance tools. The Takreen have conquered 17 species, Vector reminded them. They've seen every conventional tactic and defeated them all. But perhaps that's their weakness. They're so experienced with traditional warfare that they've become rigid in their thinking. While humans specialize in adapting, Sungmin said. We're good at this because we had to be. 10,000 years of fighting each other taught us that doctrine is just a starting point. Reality always forces improvisation. Vector looked at each of the 4 humans in turn. You understand that this mission will likely kill you. Even if everything goes perfectly, the odds of survival are minimal. We understand, sir, Daejung said. The others nodded in agreement. Why volunteer for this? It was Hana who answered. Because someone has to. Because the Takreen need to learn that conquering the galaxy isn't as easy as they thought. Because humanity joined the galactic community, and that means we fight for it. She paused. And because if we don't try, the Takreen take another step toward winning this war. We might be just cadets, but we can make a difference. Maybe the only difference that matters right now. Vector's scales shifted through several complex patterns. Finally, he straightened to his full height. Then make it count. You launch in 4 hours. Use the remaining time to rest and prepare mentally. I'll arrange for the transport to drop you at the insertion point. Thank you, sir. As the instructor left to coordinate the mission support, the 4 humans looked at each other. They were young, barely trained, armed with improvised weapons and a plan that might get them killed within the first hour. But they were also something the galaxy hadn't seen much of yet. They were humans at war, and that meant they were about to show the Takreen what 10,000 years of fighting themselves had taught humanity about survival, adaptation, and winning against impossible odds. 4 hours, Jiwoo said quietly. Should we try to sleep? I don't think I could, Hana admitted. Sungmin sat down at one of the workbenches. Then let's review the plan one more time. Make sure we haven't missed anything. Daejung joined him, pulling up the schematic again. They had 4 hours left before they entered enemy territory, with nothing but their wits and whatever they could improvise. 4 hours before they proved whether human tactical thinking could match 3,000 years of Takreen military dominance. 4 hours before they found out if a pencil sharpened right was just the beginning of what humans could do with the ordinary and overlooked.